Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you today to the third talk of the Georgetown IDP Lecture Series, following the Silk Roads to North America. So my name is Melody Dumi. I'm curator of Chinese collections and the International Dunhuang project at the British Library. This series is organized to celebrate the upcoming completion of the Georgetown IDP North American Silk Road Collections Project, which is co-supervised by Michelle Wong at Georgetown University and the International Dunhuang project at the British Library. The Georgetown IDP North American Collections Project has been generously supported by the Henry Luce Foundation and the Dunghwang Foundation. It has been managed by Dr. Miki Morita, who presented together with Michelle Wong in the opening lecture of this series. And the project began in 2016 and will bring virtually together Silk Road manuscripts and artifacts that are dispersed in North American institutions by incorporating them into the IDP's public database. So before we start, I wanted to thank the Henry Luce Foundation for funding this lecture series. And today it is my great honor to welcome Dr. Xin Wen for his lectures, A Traveler's History of the Silk Road, Revelations from Dunhuang Materials. So Xin Wen is an assistant professor of East Asian Studies and History at Princeton University. He received his PhD in Eurasian and Altaic Studies at Harvard University and an MA in the history of the Tang Dynasty at Peking University. He's now finishing his first book on diplomatic travelers on the Silk Road on the basis of Dunhuang materials. So his presentation will be followed by a Q&A session. So please do feel free to put any questions you may have via the Q&A button, and we will read them at the end of the talk. So it is now my pleasure to hand over to Xin Wen. Thank you.
All right, hi. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and thank you very much for being here. I want to thank Sia, Melody, and Michelle for their invitation. I have a lot to cover, so I'll just jump right into it. The talk today is about the Silk Road, as is this whole lecture series, and this idea is obviously open to discussion, debate. Generally speaking, we still think of it as being invented or at least first theorized by Ferdinand von Richthofen in 1877. Even though I think Matthias Mertens' recent article really shows that people have been using this term decades before him. So ever since the 18th century, after the popularization of this term, we began to see a large group of research that we can perhaps put in the basket of quote unquote Silk Road studies. And this is not the time to review the literature. I just want to show you one of the books that I consider a cornerstone of this field, The Golden Peaches of Samarkand by Edward Schaefer. And the subtitle is a study of Tang exotics. So this book and many other works on Silk Road studies, broadly defined, are very often, or maybe I could say in most cases, about what happened after something already traveled. So for Schaefer, this is about things that traveled one way or another to the domain of the Tang. For others, they would study the transmission of Manichaeism in China, for instance, the journeys of monks to India. These works on Silk Road studies obviously showed us that many of the narratives that we have about nation-based history are limited and aren't enough to describe the pre-modern world. But one thing that is lacking in most works on the Silk Road is that people rarely have a chance to look at how things and people actually traveled on the road. And here, what I mean is that the sort of maybe not very sexy details of how long does it take to get from point A to point B, what kind of things people are eating, what kind of knowledge people had while they're traveling, what kind of things or animals that people travel with. So these are the kind of questions that I'm trying to answer by using Dunhuang material, because of as you know, I think the audience here probably all know very well Dunhuang's very central location on the Silk Road, but also because of the existence of the library cave, which is the largest archive of Silk Road history. So this cave, just very briefly, was sealed up in the early 11th century and was reopened in 1900, and by this particular monk. And the documents were collected by different archaeologists, scholars, and moved to various different collections in the world. So in that sense, we can perhaps compare the Dunhuang documents to another collection of documents in the other end, at the other end of the Afro-Eurasian world, which is the Cairo-Geniza. And similarly, we can call them treasures in the wall. So briefly, Doomhall Manuscripts includes 95%, and this is very rough math. 95% are or maybe higher are in Chinese, and of them, the vast majority are Buddhist texts. But there are about 2-3% of maybe 3-4% of the Dunhuang documents are in Tibetan. In this category, most of them are Buddhist texts as well, but we do have important Tibetan texts like the Old Tibetan Annal. And then you have texts in various other languages like Khotanese, Sogdian, and then there is one text in Hebrew. One of the things that scholars have already noticed when they talk about the Dunhuang document collection is that even though Dunhuang is obviously a very important stop on the Silk Road, the materials from this cave actually rarely mention merchants. So, generally we think of the Silk Road as a commercial network, and Dunhuang Library Cave being the largest archive of the Silk Road, it is a little bit of a mystery why we don't find many merchants on the in the Dunhuang archive. So this fact, which Valerie Hansen pointed out, which I completely agree with, I would argue directs our attention to seek, to re-examine the nature of the Silk Road. Because the question is, if the largest archive of the Silk Road doesn't really have a lot of traces of merchants, then maybe we should look at the Silk Road in a different way. In order to do that, and this is also to show the kind of documents that we can use to reconstruct the history of the Silk Road from Dunhuang, I will just very briefly go through a number of documents that I think can help us reconstruct Silk Road journeys. And these are primarily from Dunhuang. So let's pause for a moment and imagine a long distance trip, right? Let's imagine, let's say you're in Kashgar or you're in Khotan and you want to go to Chang'an or Luoyang. What do you need what do you need? What kind of knowledge do you need? And what kind of things are going to happen to you on the road? These are things that traditional sources don't allow us, and by that I mean transmitted sources from China, from the Tang and Song courts, don't allow us to really access, because they encounter the travelers at the end of their journeys. Whereas Dunhuang documents allow us to capture these travelers while they're on the road. So what do we see? Before you go, what do you have to do? You have to know that this is a good day to actually leave, right? So in Dunhuang, we have documents that explicitly are used that way. So here you have this prophecy book that says here there will be wine and meat if you go east on this particular day, and it will be auspicious if you go south as well. But if you go west or north, your journey will be delayed. So this type of document presumably would have been used by travelers. In fact, we have evidence that they were in deciding their particular direction or dates of their journeys. Having decided this is a good day to travel, you need the equipment, or you need animals that would that help you on the journey. And we have documents, and there are a large number of them, such as this, which is about a diplomatic traveler from Dunhuang to the Tang capital, who borrowed one yellow male camel. And there's a whole sort of clause in terms of the kind of obligations that you have. If the camel dies on the road, you had to repay. But this is a necessary step for the journey. These travelers also were not just traveling by themselves. They were supported by a network in the Dunhuang society. And here we can see the network through this very interesting and unique document about the Society for Long Distance Travel, or in Chinese it's called Yuanxing She. So She is a community in Dunhuang that organize themselves together for various sort of charitable purposes. So you have She organization for marriages, for death and burial. But then you have similar organizations for people who do long distance travel. What they do is that they pull resources together to have a farewell banquet and welcome banquet, and also contribute financially to preparing for the journey. So now you have prepared pretty much everything. What are you going to do? Right, you have to know where you're going. They didn't have GPS, they didn't have iPhones, so how do they understand where they were going? They have road guides, and here is a guide written by a person who was traveling to India. This is called a Path to India. I'm not going to get into the details. I put the information on the guide on a map, which shows that this guide directs you, or attention, or the guide starts from Kaifeng, and then it leads you to Lingzhou, Ganzhou, and here to Dunhuang, and then to Hami and to Turfan, and all the way to India eventually. What it does is that it not only marks the places you had to stop, it also tells you how long, so this is 4,000 li, or how much time, 20 days, it takes for you to travel between 2 points. Well, this is not ideal, right? This is not as good as the GPS is, but it at least allows you to make sure, broadly speaking, that you're on the right path. There's another kind of road guide, and this is the kind of local geography that is preserved in Dunhuang. And here I quote one passage about the road, which says the road leads to Dunhuang by way of the old Yang Pass, Yangguan. The road edges many precipitous places. There are 8 springs, all possessing grassland. The road is treacherous and cannot be passed at night. In the 2 seasons of spring and fall, the snow is deep and the road is not passable. So by looking at these type of geography, a traveler would have a sense of, okay, so this is, now it's winter. Maybe this road is not not a good one to travel in winter. Maybe I need to take the other road. So again, not as good as the tools that we have as modern travelers, but indispensable and useful for pre-modern travel nonetheless. So now you know where you're going, and presumably, let's say you are successful in getting to the next stop, you will need to establish social relations as well. You can't just go and expect the people that you run into on the road to treat you the way that you wanted them to treat you. So how do you establish social relation on the road? And here is a Tibetan letter, which is a letter of introduction written by a Tibetan monk to another Tibetan monk regarding the journey of a Chinese monk. So here the connection is among these members of the broadly speaking monastic community. The introducer says in the letter that the Chinese monk is traveling to India to see the relics of Shakyamuni, and this is served as a way of making the travelers known to the hosts. And once a traveler gets to a new stop, very often, and we have a lot of evidence of it, the local government would provide for that traveler, for the foreign traveler. So here we have a list of the number of wine that was delivered to foreign diplomats. So here, envoys from Khotan, envoys from Ganzhou. So this is produced in Dunhuang, right? So it's the Dunhuang government giving wine to travelers who stopped in Dunhuang. So here is an interesting term, 送路酒, the wine that is used to send off someone on the road. So they were not only helping people when they were staying with them, they're also preparing food and wine and various other things for travelers when they begin the next leg of their journey. And here is another similar sort of distribution document or account from the Dunhuang government. In this case, the Dunhuang government was providing these travelers with paper for them to use on the road. But it was not just the hosts who give travelers things. The travelers also sometimes brought things for the host. And here is a receipt of one piece of white jade that was delivered by the king of Khotan to the lord of Dunhuang. This receipt is with us. We don't have the jade, but presumably the jade and the receipt were brought by diplomat or envoys from Khotan to Dunhuang. What is really interesting in this document is the note at the end where this is the note from the king of Khotan, who added at the end to say to the lord of Dunhuang that please send me this carpenter. I need this carpenter to be sent my way. And so here you see a kind of communication of material and technology. And then, another issue that you would encounter is that just like when we travel to a foreign country, we very often might not speak the language. And I don't know if you guys have had the experience, but I've collected a few of the Lonely Planet bilingual phrase books. They're somewhat useful if you don't know the language at all. They sort of help you imitate the sound of certain phrases. And we have the exact same thing, and there has been quite a bit of study of these documents already. And here is one example of a Chinese Cantonese phrase book, which, so here I'm showing you the part that it's all written in Brahmi, but this shaded part is actually Chinese language, shu tang la, so shui dan lai, bring the water. And then following that, you have a line in Cantonese saying exactly the same thing. So you can imagine that someone who can read Brahmi can sort of use this to imitate sound in both languages if they know one of them. So other examples, it's all about food, very important on the road. And then here is a sample sentence from another bilingual text, in this case Sanskrit and Cantonese, where it explicitly is about traveling. These travelers they were also operating in a world without a formal sort of postal service. So very often they served as messengers. So here is one document from a eminent monk in Turfan who sent this letter to monks in Dunhuang, informing them of his recent appointment as the head monk in Turfan. And this letter, and it says so explicitly in the letter itself, was delivered by envoys from Turfan. And what's really interesting about this letter is that it mentions that among the gifts that the Turfan monk sent to Dunhuang are a number of watermelons. And watermelon, if you go to Turfan now, these various kinds of melons are still really the local variety of these melons are still probably considered the best. So you can see that, and the kind of communication and transmission of plants and of vegetables and fruits on the Silk Road. But in addition to these private letters, the travelers often would have to submit official reports while they were traveling. And here is a Cantonese report that talks about the condition of the road and how the road is closed by the neighbors who are engaged in some sort of military campaign. And then, this is a common sight in many places in the world. When you go to a place, you want to leave your notes. And in Dunhuang, this is not a document. This is a graffiti from the Anxi cave. So, broadly speaking, Dunhuang studies. So you also have travelers leaving their marks physically on the landscape when they are traveling. So, having done all of these different things, the travelers either would come back to their home, or they would continue to go to the next stop. Whatever they do, there's one last thing that they need to do, which is that they need to express their gratitude for the hosts that gave them food and wine and paper and engage them and sometimes show them around. And here is one document that and I quote, express the gratitude for the accommodation of guests at a garrison or a prefecture. So this document is interesting because it copies verbatim this is a document that's used by a real person, but it copies the text verbatim from a letter model, which means that this type of letter was a common document that most people would have to use in the world of medieval Dunhuang. So after this, after this is done, this sort of wraps up this leg of the journey, and perhaps you go to very, very, very first document again, still once again consulting these prophecy books and deciding when you would leave the next time. So these are the type of documents that the Dunhuang document collection has that allows us in a really unprecedented way. Really, you don't really see the density of documents anywhere else to reconstruct the life on the road, to reconstruct how people actually traveled on the Silk Road. So I don't have a whole lot of time left, but I will further introduce a few documents to get to the broader argument of my project, which is now that we have all these documents, what difference does it make? How do these documents help us rethink the nature of the Silk Road? So I will introduce 3 documents. We'll see if I can get to the third one. The first document is a report written by a border official, an official on the border of Dunhuang in the late 9th century. So this is the document. This is a very nice image from the IDP, so starting 2589. I've highlighted this part. The most interesting piece of news that was conveyed by this letter to the Lord of Dunhuang was about the death of Huang Chao. That is listed here. Huang Chao obviously is the rebel that essentially overthrew the Tang government. So you can see that the Dunhuang, the Lord of Dunhuang, even though it was sort of an independent state at the time, was paying close attention to what was happening in Chang'an and in the broader sort of Tang world. But along with this piece of information, the letter also tells you what the different diplomatic missions from Dunhuang were doing. And here I want to show you what I mean. So this letter was written by someone in Suzhou here. So he was writing this letter to Dunhuang, to the Lord of Dunhuang here. And he was informing the Lord of Dunhuang about 4 different diplomatic missions that he sent to China or to the Tang court, and the whereabouts of these missions. So what did he report? He tells us that a group, the larger group that had 20 people, was stalled in this place in Binzhou, very close to Chang'an. Whereas there are 3 other groups. One group that was stopped in Jialin, the other 2 groups stopped in Liangzhou. So they're not making very good progress, but at least they know where they were. I would say that this document is quite striking in the sense that it shows us, for a small kingdom of Dunhuang in the late 9th century, at this very moment, at the moment of when this letter was written, there were 4 different diplomatic missions active between Chang'an and Dunhuang that the Lord of Dunhuang felt the need to keep a tab on. In fact, this is one example of many that shows the intensity of Silk Road travel in this period, because usually many scholars have made this observation that after the fall of the Tang, the Silk Road was in decline. The frequency of travel decreased. I don't know if we have any data to compare the frequency, so to speak, of the 9th and the 10th century to the frequency of the 7th and the 8th century. But there are evidence like this one from Dunhuang to show that there were a lot of people traveling. And I'll give you a few more examples. So there's one document here, this is in the St. Petersburg collection, that shows you that in this neighborhood, right, in this alley in the city of Dunhuang, of the 46 people who were living in that alley, 12 were traveling to Khotan, presumably as government envoys. So this is one document. And document number 2, and I'll turn to this in a little bit, tells us that this person, a person with the Tibetan name and this person with the Khotanese name, both were Khotanese envoys, were traveling to Dunhuang for the 7th time. And then the biography of a Dunhuang diplomat talks about how he served as envoys for 5 times, and he reached the Naifolks, the Chinese capital. And then a contract, right? Remember the contract of borrowing camels and things like that. This contract about a person named Zhang Xiuzao in the year 923 tells us that he rented camels to go to Turfan twice in 3 months. So Turfan is about 800 kilometers away. The fact that this person did this twice in 3 months shows the routinized nature of these journeys. And similarly, in number 5, a monk named Hui De traveled as a governmental diplomat for the government of Dunhuang to Ganzhou, Turfan, and Khotan, all these important neighbors of Dunhuang, within just over a year. So these data really shows that the journeys that along with this one that we see in Dunhuang documents seems to suggest a very busy network of international travel. All right, a second document that I will introduce is a poem. So usually we don't associate poetry with the experience of the everyday sort of nitty-gritty experience of traveling. But this one, I would argue, actually points to the nature of not only the so-called Silk Road in this period, but also how the Silk Road had an impact on the society of Dunhuang. So just bear with me. I'll read my translation here a little bit. So this is what is usually known as a popular poem that is produced locally in Dunhuang. It says that the 10,000 commoners, right, these common people in Dunhuang, all sing songs with their belly completely filled. They're full, they had enough to eat. And the time resembled those of Shun and Yao, meaning the siege kings of antiquity. So this is a great time. This is a great time to live, to be alive. Why? Why did the poet think it was such a good time? Because and this is sort of continue to speak about the people in Dunhuang. Do not worry about the eastern road being blocked. In the spring, the heavenly envoys will arrive, and they will offer large brocade with coiled dragons and different kinds of silk and textiles. So what is it talking about? It's talking about Dunhuang's connection to the east, right? Heavenly envoys are usually referring to Tang or Song envoys, and making a direct connection between the road to the east, the envoys from the Tang and the Song, and the importation of silk, brocade, and various kinds of textiles. But it's not only happening in the east. A few lines later, the poem continues to say that to the west, all the way into Khotan, the road will be smoother than the ones covered with cotton. They will offer precious artifacts and white jade, meaning the travelers won Khotan, as well as 1,000 types of common silk and embroidered silk and miscellaneous cloth. And all within the border of Dunhuang, everybody, not just the kings, all within the border of Dunhuang will chant song of happiness and enjoy the long life of Pengzu, who allegedly lived for 800 years. So what does this mean? What does this poem mean? How do we understand a poem like this? Or what kind of social context enabled the poet to write something like this? It is often argued that the Silk Road is this 19th century term that really had no pre-modern equivalent. That if you dig up some medieval or ancient person in Central Eurasia and ask them about the Silk Road, they would have no idea about what you're talking about. This is sort of a argument that you hear among scholars of the Silk Road. I would suggest when we read a poem like this that people in Dunhuang very much would understand what the Silk Road is. They didn't use the term, the Silk Road. That's absolutely correct. But for them to understand what this poem, the message of the poem, they cannot be entirely unfamiliar with this concept. In fact, in this poem, the direct connection between the road and the importation of luxury items, especially luxury textile such as silk, is made very explicit. Whoever wrote this poem, whoever read this poem, I would suggest that if we can time travel back to Dunhuang in the 9th and the 10th century and ask them about the Silk Road, they probably won't have a sense of what we're talking about. So this is what I think, why I think this document and the broader sort of picture of the Dunhuang document and the revelations about the Silk Road matters. The third document is I'm not going to have time to sort of go through all the different things that I prepared for this document. The third document is called Schleswig-Holstein Manuscript. So I included this because I was tasked to discuss some items of the North American collection. This is sort of an item in the North American collection in the sense that the last time anyone saw it, it was in the Harvard museums. It is we don't know where it is now. So anyone who has some information, please send it my way, and I would really appreciate it. But basically, this document has been published in the 1930s in its entirety. We don't know what the other side is. The article says that it's some sort of Chinese Buddhist text, but this side contains a large number of Khotanese and Tibetan documents. So I'm not going to go through. I'll just very quickly introduce. So here you have first Tibetan documents, which is a draft envoy report, another draft envoy report, 10 topics about how to write a letter. Here is a Khotanese economic document, a Khotanese survey document, a Khotanese list of places, a second list of places, a list of Chinese personal names, a list of Turkish personal names, a Khotanese envoy report, and a Khotanese love poem. So what does it tell us about the Silk Road? So I'm sorry, I'm just gonna skip these, prepare way too much, and go all the way to the last slide, just to give you a sense of the information that's contained in this document. So as you can see, I listed the envoys involved in these different envoy reports. The Tibetan ones and the Khotanese ones were produced by the same people. And the same people also were mentioned in the survey document, were involved in the economic document. The list of place names, if we put it on the map, shows the route from Khotan to the border of the Tang. This is list number 1. List number 2 shows the route between Hami and Kuchang. This is what we usually call the northern route and the southern route of the Silk Road. The list of the personal names are about officials that these envoys would encounter on the road, and the love poem at the very end talks about the longing for a distant lover, which seem to fit the context of this whole document. So this document used to be called a miscellany. Here I'm proposing that we evaluate this document and call it an envoy's notebook. So I'm sorry I sort of had to rush through the final document, but the 3 documents together, I want to put them together to make the point that the kind of Silk Road that we observe from the Dunhuang document, and here's a very important part, right? I'm not trying to say that there wasn't a commercial network. It may just be for one reason or another, they're not as visible in the Dunhuang documents. But what we do see in the Dunhuang document is a road that was organized by different kings in this world, and that was connected by diplomatic travelers. So this is the topic of my forthcoming monograph. I'm still working on it. Hopefully it will be out sometime late 2022 or early 2023. We'll see how that turns out. But I thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to the Q&A.
Hi, thank you, Xin, for a wonderful talk. Thank you very much also for being with us today. I think we've got a few questions, so I'll start with the first one by Michael. I think it is, what information do we have about bandits and how they protected for bandits? So hold on.
Protected from bandits.
I think the question said how they protected from bandits, but I'm not sure what that is referring
I guess, travelers, how they protect themselves from bandits. Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah, there are quite a number of records that talked about bandits on the road. These bandits, many of them were from these different kingdoms that were fighting with places like Dunhuang. So there is this group of people called the Southern Mountain people, who very often would raid journeys, would raid these diplomatic travelers, and they're usually called bandits. There are also a different kind of people who are often also called bandits. And I think in these cases, it's more rhetorical, meaning that people who are not following the proper ritual prescriptions of how to travel, if you run up to a city without announcing your imminent arrival, often these people were often also called bandits. The way that they protect themselves from bandits was that there was very close connection between these different kings on the road. For instance, we have letters between the king of Dunhuang and the king of Ganzhou telling one another that we need to keep the road open and protect each other's border. And it's kind of like sometimes like modern border crossing. I will prevent people from raiding your travelers. So there are all these military establishments located between the centers of these smaller kingdoms that the kings relied on to protect them from the bandits. So that's usually how it works.
Thank you. The next question, which is from Gregory, is, do we know the population of Dunhuang around this time, the time of the material you discussed? And because it seems small today, aside from visitors.
It is quite small. The you know, I would say the problem is that the kingdom of Dunhuang very often actually controlled a large area. So in the mid 9th century, so in the 850s, Dunhuang was actually quite powerful. So the kingdom controlled almost the entire Hexi corridor. So then the population is quite large, but if you're just talking about the city of Dunhuang and its immediate adjacent area, I think it's something on the scale of 30,000 people would be a pretty good guess. In fact, there was a letter that, I mean, we can't really take it very sort of on its face value, but there's a letter written by the commoners of Dunhuang proposing a diplomatic treaty with the Han of the Uyghur Kingdom of Ganzhou that talks about 10,000 commoners. So, you know, I think that's sort of the scale that we can think of it. There's no very specific numbers.
Thank you. So we also have a question from Ricardo, who said, well, I wonder if you could talk about the kinds of people who were made to travel, such as servants or even slaves. And she refers to Frances Wood's chapter in her latest book, and says that she's asking because she's always wondered about the so-called Kunlun boy ceramic figures and their origin of the ceramics. And she's referring to a ceramic in the V&A collections in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London.
Yeah, thanks for the very nice. I'm I'm a little bit distracted. I'm looking at the image. So these are mostly from at least my understanding is that from early to mid Tang. That we don't really see. There aren't really a lot of evidence about you know, that sort of speak directly to these type of materials. But there were definitely slaves being transported or traveling along with the travelers that I talk about in this talk. It's when you think of let's say the 7th century or the 8th century from documents in Turfan, this is why I mean that I'm not trying to argue that there wasn't a commercial network, because there's clear evidence that there was. In Turfan, there are all these contracts about slave selling, and they show that many of the people would travel with a slave, especially from South Guyana to Turfan, and then sell their slave there. In Dunhuang, in the 9th and 10th century, there are still slave selling contracts, but they're mostly local affairs. They're mostly just people in Dunhuang becoming slave of one another, and don't usually involve long distance travel. When they do, they often were also part of a diplomatic journey. There are there was a mission from Dunhuang that traveled to, I think, the Song court. I forgot it was Tang or the Song. I forgot the exact date of that record, that had 2 Tibetan women as slave with them. So, you know, this type of slave trade or slave exchange absolutely continued in this period.
Thank you. So we also have a question from Wang. So thank you, Professor Wen, for this wonderful talk. We have seen many documents that demonstrate the flow of people, knowledge, and goods along the Silk Road, but are there any Dunhuang or Silk Road documents that tell us the stories about the control or even restriction of traveling? That's a great question. So, you know, if I can zoom out just for a little bit, there's a common understanding that more people traveled when they're larger empires. And when you see political fragmentation, like what you see in the 10th century, right? In China, you have the 5 dynasties and the 10 kingdoms. In the western part, you have Dunhuang, Ganzhou, Turfan, Khotan, all these small kingdoms that just make your head explode when you have to read about them. Interestingly, the clearest record of travelers being prevented from traveling are from the time of the empire.
because I would argue it was the empire that had the resource in it, that had the sort of geographical coverage to try to prevent people from traveling. I mean, the most famous example is the record of Xuanzang, right? When Xuanzang was traveling within the domain of the Tang, he was stopped again and again. He was shot at with arrows and almost didn't make it. But once he got out of the Tang, once he got to Turfan, when there were a lot of smaller kingdoms, his journeys became a lot easier. And in the world that I'm trying to look at in the 9th and 10th century, where you have all these different kingdoms, people seem to be generally incentivized to travel and to send travelers. There really aren't a lot of cases of people stopping. I mean, I can think of a few cases where there's a letter, a Khotanese letter, about the Lord Dunhuang trying to stop Khotanese travelers because he considered the road dangerous, because the neighbor was having some political issues. So he didn't want to send the travelers on their way because he would presumably be blamed if the travelers were harmed or killed on the road. But other than that, usually most people were quite happy to engage in diplomatic travel.
Thank you. The next question actually refers to one of the Khotanese manuscripts where you wrote that it contained a list of Turkish people names. So the question is, can you explain what you mean by Turkish?
Well, so, I guess this is the work that Clausen and Ligeti and all these trichologists have already done on this list. These are just people with generally recognizable Turkish titles like Kur, and some sort of titles that were borrowed into Turkish and Uyghur that were originally Chinese, like Dudu, or that was borrowed and sort of transcribed as Tutok. So that's what I mean. It's hard to tell if it is. I guess it's Turkish, not maybe like not old Turkic, but more like Uyghur. Maybe that would have been a better way to say it. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Next one is from Susan Huang. So says, thank you very much for such an inspiring talk. I wonder if you can comment on the Dunhuang documents about the lore of talismans, Buddhist and Taoists alike. Could some of them also fall into the traveling preparation materials?
Yes, absolutely. I think so. I sort of mentioned this a little bit. There was a Khotanese document that talks about when these travelers were on the way. In fact, I think it is the Steele-Holstein document that talks about how when they were on the way, they sort of did some sort of prophecy, or they did something. I don't know exactly what they did, and they decided that it's not auspicious to travel on this way, so they took a different way. So you can see that people were doing that kind of thing, using the sort of prophecy books. But in terms of talisman, there are Buddhist texts about Vaishvana that who is one of the 4 guardians, who is particularly important as a guardian for travelers. That people would invoke the name of. I mean, Avalokiteshvara is also another one they would invoke to sort of protect them while they're on the road, but also protect the family members of their family members who were traveling. So in Dunhuang, you see prayer books invoking, in particular, these 2 deities. I think the talisman also sort of worked similarly.
Thanks. The next question is, why would a society of long distance travelers only provide urn of wines for the people traveling and coming back for the from official journeys? Why is there no mention of food?
So there are actually mention of food. You know, I didn't sort of include it in the talk, but there are this, you know, reference to this thing called Dao Liang or Cheng Liang, or Liang is food, Dao is the road, right? That usually were disseminated and given to people while they're traveling. But this is a very important question that I won't have time to talk too much about, which is the dynamic about how much food do you bring, because you know you want to minimize the amount of food that you have a very limited carrying capacity. So what do you put on the camel's back is a question that all of these travelers have to think about. Obviously, you had to carry some food, but I think the assumption, the sort of situation that I see in these documents is that very few people would bring the food that was enough for the whole journey. They would just get replenishment. They get more food while they're on the road, and very often the food were provided by the hosts that they met on the road.
Thank you. There's a question about women on the Silk Road, and what they were, if they traveled on the Silk Road, what were they recorded as doing?
Yes. So there is this very tantalizing record of a diplomatic journey led by a nun to Dunhuang, to the Song court from Ganzhou. So you know, the record, which is preserved in Song sources, only tells us that she was traveling with 2 other people, but they had 10 horses or camels, I forgot which one it was, with them, which you know would suggest that there was a larger retinue with them. So that is a very explicit record of a woman leading a diplomatic mission. And then you have all these different cases of, you know, princesses who were married. So in between Dunhuang and his neighbors, there was a white marriage network. The Khotanese prince and the Uyghur prince would marry into the Dunhuang family, and they would travel to Dunhuang, and they would bring them with them a lot of female attendants. At the same time, you know, the document that I talked about that talked about 4 diplomatic missions. One of the missions, the report said explicitly about that mission was that that was consisted of the head and his wife and his children and a bunch of other officials. So in that case, you know, sometimes the women also traveled with male diplomats.
Thank you, Xin. I'm a bit conscious of time, but we've got a few more questions, so I wonder if
I'm okay. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. That's very kind.
No, of course.
So we've got one about Paleo-Chinois 2826, asking if it is the only manuscript which documented commodity exchanges among kings and local officials in the Dunhuang collections.
This is a very advanced question. I don't remember what Paleo-Chinois 2826 is about.
I mean, we can take that one, give you time to think.
Oh, yeah. No, I found it. It's, wait, the question is, if it is...
Is it the only manuscript which documented commodity exchanges amongst kings and local officials in the Dunhuang collection?
Oh, it's not the only one. It's not even one of the 10 or 20. There are many more.
Thank you.
I think there was a question on top of that wasn't.
Yes, there's also, sorry, these, because I think that person already had it. So I want, depending on how much time you had, I wanted to give other people a chance. Okay. But the other question, the following question was, what was the proportion of Buddhist pilgrims compared to merchants and other travelers on the Silk Road?
So there were a lot of Buddhist travelers. There's no question about it. Some of the documents that I used were initially produced by Buddhist travelers. but I think the questioner gets to a really key point, which is difficult to sort of difficult to study, which is because we don't have a full accounting of the kind of people who are traveling and their numbers sort of in the context of the population, right? So, my very coward answer is that it's really impossible to know. There are places where you see hints of that, of sort of different proportions of travelers, maybe not necessarily Buddhist. There is a document from Turfan that dates to the 5th century that talks about how the government of Turfan was sending these escorts, these people from Turfan, to travel with envoys as safeguards, right? So there are different envoys traveling all to Turfan from India, from South China, and they were sent to the Rouran Empire. From that document, in the space of 11 months, the Turfan government dispatched 1,400 people to do this kind of job. So the population of Turfan at the time is about 20,000. And if you think of these people as generally adult male, the percentage is about 20% of the adult male were engaged in this 1 year as escorts for diplomats. So maybe that gives us a sense of the scale.
Thank you. There's also a question, during the Han Dynasty, the food on the roads to the western regions was described as bitter, so Is there any evidence in Dunhuang manuscripts that envoys were not used to the food they got offered in the commanderies and places they passed?
The food that they eat, the most common food that they eat is essentially like, if you've been to Xinjiang, you know the naan bread. That essentially is the most common food. In fact, I mean, this is, many people know this. There's a piece that was discovered in the Turfan tomb. So we don't have records of the people complaining about the food being bad, but there are records of differentiations between different kinds of food. You have the regular naan. So in these sort of expenditure accounts from Dunhuang, sometimes they would say, this X number of fine food or fine sort of supplies were given to this group of people. And then X number of sort of regular supplies were given to a different group of people. Usually the first group is of a higher status. So there you sort of see the distinction between better food and sort of more regular food. And then if you expand your horizon in Chang'an, for instance, you have records of people making the kind of naan bread that's stuffed with lamb and a lot of oil. That's kind of, I call it a deluxe version of the naan that presumably would have been much better than the regular naan these travelers would eat. So I sort of think of it as when we travel now, right? When we travel on airplane, we had to eat the travel food. They're usually not as good as the food that you eat when you can actually settle down and have a banquet. So there's a distinction in that sense. Yeah.
Thank you. There's also some Ariel saying, fascinating talk. Thank you. Could you please elaborate on the Hebrew manuscript?
I'm not an expert on that, but it's, as far as I understand, it's a prayer book. We don't really know, what how it got to Dunhuang. There are a lot of studies on that document. The one that I think is a definitive piece is by Professor Wu Qiyu, that was in French, I believe. So I would just remind the readers to consult that. I can't really speak to this.
Thank you. Thank you. We have one last question, so I think you've been so generous, we'll take it.
Oh yeah, of course.
Are there some Chinese Buddhist texts translated from Khotanese, Uyghur, or Tocharian?
I mean, so this is sort of, again, also beyond my expertise, but there must have been Khotanese text translated from Tocharian. At least that's my understanding. But in this period, it's usually the other way around. It's usually Khotanese, Uyghur translations of Chinese Buddhist texts, and there are many examples of that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think that's all we've got time for today, but the number of questions really shows that our audience did really enjoy your talk, and we've received also some very nice comments in the chat. So we can send them to you later, but thank you again for joining us today and for this wonderful presentation. And so I thank you also for the audience, and I hope you can join us next Wednesday and also on the 25th for 2 more lectures as part of that series. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Yes, and if you want to follow us or contact us after the lecture, we can pass your questions if you have any at idp@bl.uk.
Follow IDP on Twitter.
Thank you.
I follow them on Twitter. They have a lot of good stuff.
Then you see it's coming from the students, from the speaker themselves. So you've got to follow our accounts. Thank you very much. Bye.